Hello, I am Karem Simon, Chair of the Department of Music at the University of Prince Edward Island. Welcome to this episode of our distinguished UPEI Music Alumni Series. Throughout this series of podcasts, we invite our music alumni to share their music and professional journeys. In so doing, we'll look to our students' past as a means of informing and perhaps inspiring our current students. Today's guest is pianist, vocal coach, repetiteur, and conductor, class of 1996 alumnus, Carrie Ann Matheson. This podcast is being recorded in February 2022. I am in Charlottetown, and Carrie Ann is participating from her home in San Francisco. Welcome, Carrie Ann.
Hi, Karem. What a delight to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so let's get going here, Carrie Ann. Could you describe your childhood and music-related experiences?
Oof. Okay, out of the gate. Well, look, I grew up in PEI. I had my first lessons in PEI. I started playing the piano at around the age of 7. When a couple of years in, I started studying with Frances Gray, actually, long before I was even thinking about college. She helped me sort of take my initial steps into the big world, and I spent a lot of time in the Steel Recital Hall and doing music festivals. And so UPEI was a part of my musical life long before I was actually a student there. I actually used to practice there, as my parents thought that it was a little bit distracting at home, and so they arranged for me to be able to go and practice at UPEI. So I got to hear all of these people who were far and above more developed musicians than I was. So I had early inspiration from UPEI.
Good, very good. So then, why did you choose to study at UPEI?
Well, I started my university education actually at McGill, and I stayed 1 year there, and it just ultimately wasn't the right fit.
Okay.
So I came home after 1 year, and look, the faculty at UPEI was great. It was better for me at that point to be in a little bit of a smaller pond where I could have more individual attention from instructors. And to be at home was really great, but it came down to the quality of the education.
Okay.
In the end, and I got a really fine education from UPEI.
Okay. Can you describe, Carrie Ann, the focus of your study while you were a student here, and what about the UPEI music experience resonated with you?
I think it comes back again to individual attention. The small class sizes allowed each of us to have really direct access to all of the teachers on the faculty. And in some schools you're just a number in a class of hundreds of people, but each one of the people on the faculty knew us as people and were really involved in our development, not only as musicians and as students, but as people. And I can remember some really important conversations, having really important conversations with you, with Dr. Reeser, with Fran Gray, with Betty Ann Younker, just about life things, about things that you struggle with when you're a college student, that now that I'm the age, like professor age, and I and I see myself having these conversations with my students.
Mhm.
I realized how lucky I was to have had people who were invested in me in my development musically and personally.
I understand. And, I think you have captured the uniqueness of the UPEI music department in your response because it has remained that way throughout my tenure here. Classmates, who were among the classmates while you were a student with us, Carrie Ann? Drop some names.
Well, this is a really fun thing to think about. Um, because as I said, my association with PEI with UPEI started before I was actually a student there, when I was studying with Dr. Gray as a teenager, and I would walk the hall to get into a practice room and hear Mark Parsons practicing in a room, or Dale Sorensen, or Ellen Dempsey, now Ellen Davis. And all of these people were so inspiring
Mm-hmm.
to me. They weren't my actual classmates when I got to college, but their work ethic and their interest in music was really fundamental in my development as a young musician. And I was so lucky to get to sort of be a fly on the wall while they were having their college experience. And then when I got into college, Lori Stavert was a
Oh, yes.
really great friend of mine. Shelley Griffin, Karen Rose, Kevin McLean. I the the list goes on and on and on.
Yeah, those are, I remember those names well. Very, very
Yeah,
good people, very fine students, very fine musicians.
absolutely.
Good. So, could you outline, Carrie Ann, what happened after UPEI? So, where did you go to study, and how did this shape you?
Hmm. You know, it took me a little bit longer than most to graduate from UPEI. I didn't do my UPEI degree in the traditional 4 years. I took 6 years because I took a little bit of a hiatus in the middle. I've always been a person who is always has sought to find the right place for me. And
Mhm.
when something doesn't feel right, then I tend to sort of go, nope, this is not working. Let's try something else. And during my time at UPEI, I just pressed pause and entered the non-musical world for a little bit, and then came back to it. And UPEI was there with open arms, waiting, knowing that I was going to. You all knew that I was going to come back, and you welcomed me and continued to train me. So when I left UPEI, it was during my years at UPEI that my love of collaborating with people, musically collaborating with people, started to become really apparent. And I feel like that it was initially nurtured there. I had my first experiences with Dr. Gray in an accompanying class, and then also with collaborating with you and your students, and the students of Greg, playing brass sonatas. And that was kind of where, if I could look back, that was the genesis of my career
Mm.
as it is right now. Um, so
I remember, Carrie Ann, at that time, you were playing some relatively big repertoire in our studios because, the students whose names you mentioned were playing substantial works. And you were getting around uh, those heavy duty sonatas very, very well. So those students were, I'm sure, very grateful to having a collaborative pianist, someone with the skill set that you had at the time.
yeah, it was great. I always I quite often reference my time at UPEI as giving me a knowledge of the wind and brass repertoire that none of my colleagues have. And so, we didn't have a big string program. So where my colleagues in the business right now spend a lot of time playing, Brahms violin sonatas and stuff, that stuff came later.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a really excellent grasp on all the important wind and brass works by the time I left UPEI.
Okay, good, very good.
And it's what that gave me, actually, I can tell you looking back, and I know I'll come back to your question, but about what I did after UPEI, but when I started to stand on the podium, having that kind of experience, being in rooms, being in clarinet lessons, being in saxophone lessons, being in trombone lessons, being in flute lessons, and also having a music education degree and having some sort of idea how to play all of the instruments. As a conductor, that's invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
So all of it was the genesis was there at UPEI. That's where it all started.
You mentioned the music education degree, and as a conductor, a lot of what you do on the podium is instruct, you teach, and that is so valuable. Good, good. Continue. So, at what point did the Cleveland Institute enter the picture?
Well, so again, in this weird way that my life goes, I left UPEI and I went to University of Victoria. And I did 1 year there in the solo piano degree.
Okay.
And I had a great teacher there named Robin Wood, who I met in a music festival, and just such a great, kind man. And I was not interested in being a solo pianist, Karem. I don't have that there's nothing in me that wants to be a solo pianist. Spend 8 hours in a room by yourself practicing? No, thank you. Not my thing. So I started going into my lessons and saying, yeah, I'm playing this trio. Can we work on this? And finally, one day he looked at me and said, it seems to me that you're really, really interested in this. And in the great way that fate, God, whatever you want to call it, puts things in front of you when it's time, then I had the opportunity to go to Santa Barbara, California, to a school there called Music Academy of the West.
Okay. I know.
And I remember thinking, well, this is the greatest musical place I've ever seen. Everybody plays. They're all, students from Juilliard and from big colleges all over America and Canada. And I thought, okay, well, here I am, this girl from PEI, and I'm going to do it. And so things started to shift for me there. And I thought, I'm not interested in going back and continuing a solo master's degree. I don't want to be a soloist. Mm-hmm. So during that summer at Music Academy, the opportunity arose for me to go to Cleveland and do my master's degree in accompanying.
Okay.
And so I made a shift like that. I called my mom and dad and said, so this has happened. I have this invitation. I really want to do it. And bless them, they went on the ride and they said, sure. Okay, if this is really what you want to do, then we'll support you in that. And so I drove back to British Columbia, packed up my stuff, and moved to Cleveland. And I spent 2 years at the Cleveland Institute, just diving straight in. And thanks to UPEI with the heads up, I had lots of wind and brass repertoire in my fingers, and became developed relationships immediately because nobody else had that stuff in their fingers. People had grown up with string players.
Of course.
And so, it's really funny because when I started my job here in San Francisco, which we'll come to, one of the first people I was in contact with was the principal trumpet player of the San Francisco Opera Orchestra, who was a student, a class behind me in Cleveland, and he said, "Oh yeah, I mean, you were a powerhouse. You played for all the brass players." And I went, "Well, yeah, because I knew all the rep from my time at UPEI."
Terrific. Terrific.
Yeah, so from Cleveland, I stayed there for 2 years, and in the summers I would go to music academy. And the first year I did instrumental accompanying, and it was there that I discovered, okay, I really, really like working with people who sing with words.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my first foray, really, into proper foray into that world. And they nurtured that also in Cleveland. And then I went to New York. I switched to Manhattan, or I started a professional studies degree at Manhattan School of Music.
Okay.
And it was there in New York that the track of my career became really evident, that I was going to belong to this world of opera and song.
Okay. So you focus on this professional degree at the Manhattan School of Music. Could you just elaborate on that?
Sure. So it's a 1-year professional studies degree, and it's tailor-made. You study languages, you study the art of vocal collaboration. You work a little bit with the opera department. I started to put my toe in the water with vocal coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because I remember being in a room with a Swiss baritone who he's Swiss, so he spoke Italian, French, and German and English flawlessly. And I didn't speak anything really except for English at that point. And I remember going into my teacher saying, "Well, what am I supposed to say to this guy? He speaks all these languages. He knows this music way better than I do. And I'm just, I'm learning." And I had a really, really great teacher there. Probably the I don't want to say the most important teacher, but probably the teacher that had the biggest impact on this part of my life. That started at Music Academy and Manhattan School. His name is Warren Jones. And Warren said to me, "Yeah, you got to learn just like everybody else. So just, about music and just talk about music." So we talked about music, and this chap then became he stopped singing eventually, but he became the general director of opera companies. We met in Switzerland a couple of years ago, and he was working for a program in Russia that I really had wanted to get involved with. Mm-hmm. And I told him, "Oh yeah, I've always been interested in that program." And he facilitated that. And then I'm on their faculty. It's funny how life works that way. People mm-hmm. end up in front of you when you might not expect that they're going to show up.
There you go. So, Carrie Ann, could you explain for us, for those who don't understand the realm of being a vocal coach? You mentioned about diction. And mm-hmm. so could you explain, in your role as a vocal coach, the sorts of things that you do when you're working with singers?
Sure. So there's a difference between a voice teacher and a vocal coach. Mm-hmm. A voice teacher will talk about things like the mechanism of how to use your breath, about what to do with your jaw, about how to do with space to make different sounds, and how to use your tongue. I don't talk about that stuff. What I talk about is music. I talk about character. I talk about phrasing. I talk about how to use your language in a way that allows you as a singer to express what it is that you want to express. Mm-hmm. part of my responsibility is to say, okay, these are the parameters that a conductor is going to need from you. And so if you want the conductor to love you, hand him or her this kind of upbeat. If you want them to be really annoyed with you, don't do it rhythmically. And
there you go. Okay, there are legendary stories about singers who have been who haven't been coached properly and who get themselves into all sorts of problems working with people who are much more informed about the music.
yeah.
And so your role as a vocal coach is to make certain that the singers that you work with are very well prepared. And I know some of the things you mentioned is just your own education with diction, and our, most vocal coaches that I know are well versed in what German, Italian, French,
Yeah.
and are there others that you are comfortable with, Carrie Ann?
Well, I took Russian and I studied Russian and I studied Czech. But that was project specific because I needed to have some facility with the language in order. When you're a vocal coach or a pianist in an opera house, if the singer is not there and a rehearsal has to happen, you need to sing their part while you're playing.
There you go.
And so I felt like I had a responsibility to make sure that I was facile enough, at least in the pronunciation of those languages. I don't choose to coach Slavic music because I don't know enough about the way that the language works. But what I do know is who to send them to to
Exactly.
coach that stuff,
Of
right?
course. Yeah, exactly. Good.
But I did study intensively Italian, French, and German, and to a speaking level, which is I think is really important. Um, I wouldn't say that I definitely did not speak German until I moved to a German-speaking country and was absolutely forced to do it.
Okay.
But it was a very smart move on my part.
Good. 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 So Carrie Ann, let's move on.
Okay.
At some point after the Manhattan School of Music, you entered the Young Artist program at the Metropolitan Opera. So could
Yeah.
you speak to that, please?
So this is something important, I think, that I really would love for all the students at UPEI to know is that you never know when you're going to have a conversation that is going to change the direction of your life. I had petitioned Manhattan School. Manhattan School generously gave me a full scholarship to go, and those conservatories are not cheap, and they gave me a full scholarship to go for 1 year. I petitioned them for another year of professional studies because I felt like I still had some more learning to do.
Mm-hmm.
And they granted it. And on the first day of school in my second year, I ran into the Italian diction teacher outside the elevators. And he said to me, Carrie Ann, the Met is looking for a pianist for their Young Artist program, and they've done 2 rounds of auditions and they can't find anyone that they like. You need to go play for them. And I said, no. My whole year is to prepare for this audition. That's why I'm back here. So it's my plan for next year. And he said, oh, well, I've already given them your name, and there's going to be a
Love it.
message when
I
you get
love it.
home. Right. So I got home, and yes, indeed, there was a message on my answering machine back in the 1800s. A message on my answering machine from the Met saying, we would like to hear you. Can you come in on Tuesday and play? And this was Friday afternoon. I called my teacher in a panic because their audition requirements were huge. And he said, hang on, let me call them. So he called the Met on my behalf and said, there's no way, folks, that she can have those requirements ready for you by Tuesday, but what she can play are these things. And they said, fine, no problem. So I locked myself in my apartment for 3 days and practiced and practiced and practiced, and went to the Met, did the audition, was offered the spot on immediately. They had me wait outside the room for 5 minutes. They went away and did what they had to do, and then they came back and offered me the spot. And there are two reasons that I tell you this, because number one, being open to new experiences is really, really important, and being brave and taking a big leap, even though it's scary as heck, to just do it. That's one thing. The other thing is about institutional support, because I was an international student. I'm a Canadian, of course, and I was in the US on a visa from the Manhattan School of Music. Right. When I went to Manhattan School, of course, my teacher had already told them that this happened. I got called in for a meeting with the dean, and he said to me, Carrie Ann, the opportunity that you're being given is exactly what we train our students for. So we're going to release you from your obligations here. You can stay under our visa umbrella until the Met sorts out what they need to do. And at the same time, you still have your scholarship here if you want to come back and take lessons with your teacher, or if there are any other classes that you want to come to in addition to what you're doing at the Met, please know that the doors are open. We're here to support you.
Wow, very good.
Now, for them, that's an investment of what, $45,000 at that time. And they just handed it to me.
Terrific.
So institutional support is really important.
It is indeed. Good. So you're at the in this young artist program with the Metropolitan Opera. So what exactly were you doing there?
Oof. So the Met is an amazing place. Every day you can hear one of the greatest orchestras in the world, rehearsing, performing. I had like an all access pass. I spent so many nights standing on the side of the stage, watching the way things work, watching the conductor and the monitor, or sitting out in the house and sitting over the pit in the company box, watching the way that this all happens. Having access to the greatest singers in the world, the greatest conductors in the world, and this massive institution that produces music and opera on the highest level. And I was there all day, every day for 14 years. I did 2 years in the training program, and then they created a position for me at the Met as the staff coach of that same training program. So what that allowed me to do was, after my 2-year apprenticeship, I got to stay full-time at the Met, but I didn't have the ultimate responsibility. There was always someone over me to whom I was responsible. So the way it worked was the singers would come and prepare their things with me first, and then I would prepare it for my boss. They would go see him after they had worked with me. And then after they saw him, then they would go and work with James Levine. And
now there's a name.
Yeah. One of the great teachers of my life. I learned, I can't even, I'm so deeply grateful for my time with him, because he's crafted the musician that I am today. I've been a huge part of that development.
So that I understand. And so you were like an assistant vocal coach, and then they go to someone who is the vocal coach who And then after the singers have worked with him, was it him?
Yeah.
And then they'd get to work with James Levine.
Mm-hmm.
That's the progression of how
Yeah.
things worked when you were the assistant vocal coach with the
Yeah.
Met.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I did that for 6 years. And then I got bored of doing that. And I went to Levine and said I'd gotten another opportunity actually in Los Angeles to go there and be their head of music staff. And again, this will all tie in. So I'd gone to Los Angeles to work on a couple of productions and got along really, really well with the music director and the administration there. And they offered me a really lovely position. And I didn't feel like I had enough training at that point to take that job. But I went back to the Met and talked to Jimmy about it. And he and the then head of music staff at the Met, they said, well, how would you feel if we switch things up for you around here? So they took me out of the staff coach position with the young artist program, and I was still also working with the big house at that time, but they moved me over full time with the big house and had me start doing something called prompting. So I was a prompter and a pianist and a coach.
Prompter,
At the Met.
pianist, coach. Okay. Tell us about prompting.
Well, prompting is one of the cool jobs of the world. So there's this little box at the front of an opera stage. The orchestra is behind you and the singers are in front of you. And you sit in, I mean, it's kind of like Zoom world actually, where you only see this much of a person.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm there as kind of an assistant to the conductor and assistant for the singers. I would help them, give them little text clues before, because it's when you're singing a 3-hour opera, it's easy to forget a word here and there, and so there's someone there to help you get your text if you get lost. So
Yeah.
I give them their words before they sing them, sort of in a very rhythmic and very soothing way. And also, if they get out of time with the conductor, I can fix it faster than the conductor can, because he or she is very far behind, like in space, like in terms of distance.
Yeah.
So I can actually talk to the singers, they can hear me. And I have, there are hand gestures that you can make, like you're going too fast, or come on, folks, we need to speed this up. Mm-hmm. And so it's like the first line of defense for an opera production, and a little insurance policy hidden out of sight. And you can imagine you've got really at the Met the greatest singers in the world in front of you and the greatest conductors behind you. I spent tons of time there with Jimmy conducting, and when he asked me if I wanted to do this, I said, well, I don't have any idea how to do that. I'd spent years actually peeking at the people from the side of the stage, like, what are they doing down there in that box? And what is this magic? But he knew that I would figure it out. Yeah. And he said, you're not going to be good at it at first, but you'll figure it out.
Okay.
And good. I did. And I did it for a lot of years.
Wow. There you go. Good. So you were at the Met for what, 14 years? Is that what you said?
Yeah, it was really 15 in the end, because I took a sabbatical in my last year and then never came back.
I understand. Okay, so then what happened? You go on sabbatical, and then how does your professional life unfold from there?
Well, again, you never know when that one person is going to ask you at exactly the right time to do something. So I get an email one day from the conductor Fabio Luisi, who I'd worked, he was then the principal guest conductor at the Met, and we did a lot of projects together. And he said, how would you feel about coming to work here in Switzerland? There's this job that's open. would you be interested? And I thought about it and thought, okay, at that point, I was in my early 40s. I had tenure at the Met. It was a nicely paid job. I was very comfortable, but that little voice in me that tends to work on like a 6 or 7 year cycle said, no, it's time for me to have a new challenge. Mm-hmm. So I decided, I went to the Met and said, can I take a sabbatical and go try this out? And they approved it, no problem. And so I took a big jump and moved to Zurich, Switzerland.
Okay.
And Fabio, I had been Fabio's prompter, and when you're a prompter in an opera rehearsal, the conductor would sit on my left, and he can see what I'm doing with my hands and how I'm interacting with singers. So he knew what kind of rhythm I had and what kind of leadership ability I had. And so he knew, he said, I think you would be a great conductor. Do you want to try conducting?
Uh-huh. I was wondering when this was going to enter the conversation.
Okay. He gave me my first opportunities.
Okay.
I'd conducted a couple of rehearsals at the Met because as a prompter, sometimes you have to step in and conduct rehearsals, but I'd never stood in front of an orchestra before. And I said, sure. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to get to do like Marriage of Figaro or whatever. No. You don't start that way. They gave me this crazy modern piece, crazy, that was, every bar was in a different time signature. And that kind of music was not previously my strong point. And mm-hmm. When I say that, I mean, like, I avoided it like the plague.
Okay.
I didn't want to do it during my whole time at the Met because there were plenty of people who loved that music and were happy to specialize in it. But I decided, okay, if this is my only chance, and if this is what he wants me to do, and if he thinks I can do it, I'm going to do it.
Okay.
And so I dove in. I had resources. I had friends that I could call on to help me figure out how to do it.
Yeah, it's good to have
friends. Learned, yeah, right.
Yeah.
I learned how to conduct it, and I did it, and I did a pretty good job. I wasn't the greatest conductor in the world at the beginning, but I sure got better over my time that I.
Carrie Ann, the conductor in me has to ask, the actual physical, gestural side of conducting. Mm-hmm. Where did you learn that craft? Did you just intuit from being around all these wonderful conductors, or at some point did someone take you through the various conducting gestures?
I actually think it was you and Greg that taught me that at UPEI.
Oh dear. Okay. I'm so sorry, Carrie Ann. Anyway, no. Okay, good. Very good.
No, that conducting in ensembles. When we'd have to conduct the brass ensemble or the wind ensemble in school.
Yeah, I remember how Greg Irvin would organize his conducting class for that sort of thing. Good, very good. Okay, good. Let's go on. I'm fascinated. So
and I had help, of course. If I got stuck with a corner or something, I would go to Fabio, and he would, before everything I conducted, he was really generous with his time with me, that I would make a list of corners that I wanted to make sure that they were clear before I stood in front of an orchestra. And so he did that for a certain number of years, and then he was like, you don't really need me to do this anymore, do you?
Okay.
But he was always really willing to help. And it's great when it stops being about the mechanics of the gesture, and then it can graduate into being, okay, how do I find my own body language so that I can communicate what's in my heart to the people in the pit and on the stage. And I feel like that came together in my last couple of years at Zurich, in when I started conducting rep, that really spoke to me as a musician.
Good. Very good. So how many years were you in Zurich?
6.
6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happened?
So there seems to be a theme here I'm discovering as I talk about my life. Remember how I talked about I'd worked in Los Angeles and they had offered me a job? My boss here in San Francisco was the person who offered me that job in Los Angeles.
Okay.
And he was coming through Zurich to watch. His name is Greg Henkel, and he's the managing director artistic of San Francisco Opera. He was in Zurich to watch a show. He reached out and he said, "Hey, I'm in Zurich. Can we get together?" We had 20 minutes. It was all that we could fit in our schedules. And I said, I'm finding that I'm getting a little bit bored of what I'm doing here, 6 years. And I think I'm going to probably move more into training young artists. And so I'm sort of crafting in my mind what that looks like. And I didn't think anything of it. And about a year later, I get a WhatsApp message from him saying, "Hey, could we talk about San Francisco Opera and our 2 training programs here?" And I remember saying to my husband, "Yeah, I don't want to leave Europe, so but it's Greg, so I'm going to talk to Greg." But this phone call is only going to be half an hour because I'll just catch up with him and tell him I'm not really interested in coming to San Francisco. And the conversation was like 2.5 hours long. And we started talking about philosophy of music and training and what is needed in our business, what is needed in our world, where the holes are, where we want to fix it. And I'm here.
There you go. Good.
So all of these people, so all of this to say that foster relationships with people, because that's my entire career has been made from and because of that.
Yeah, I understand that. So exactly what are you doing with the San Francisco Opera right now?
So I am the artistic director of the San Francisco Opera Center Adler Fellowship Program. I have my partner, Marcus, who is the general manager of the program. We have 11 young musicians with us, 2 pianists and 9 singers. And we train them for 2 years, essentially, very intensively. It's a training program for after they finish school, before they enter the professional world. It's like a finishing school.
Yeah.
So they've all graduated from college and are getting their final touches put on before they take their steps into the big world. So that's a big part of my job. The other program that we run is we provide the artistic direction for the Merilla Opera Program, which is a summer festival. It's 12 weeks in the summer, and we have 30 people here, and our Adler Fellows come out of that class. So it's like a 3-month intensive process, and you might be invited to join the Adler program after, which means that you would get 2 more years of this kind of training. So in the Merilla program, we produce an opera. We have a big scenes program with orchestra. It's 12 weeks of intensive training with some of the world's best faculty. We also have a whole other side of what we've brought to this program, in that we believe in not only training the musician, but we believe in training the person. And this comes back to what I was talking about at UPEI, the investment in the development of people is how we're going to have a successful world going forward, not just people who play really well.
I understand. This is all fascinating. Carrie Ann, thank you. I'm wondering if we could pivot from here and just outline your career as a performer. You've had the privilege to collaborate with some wonderful singers and instrumentalists. So, could you drop some names and outline some of your experiences, please?
Yeah. Yeah, I have had great fortune, and it started when I was in New York. And again, it started because of relationships that I made when I worked in the opera house. Investing in people and caring about people is how that all started. Great singers like Jonas Kaufmann and Joyce DiDonato and Rolando Villason and Piotr Beczała, like the Anna Netrebko, really all of the people that I worked with that were big stars at the Met, I ended up getting on stage with many of them. And some I developed a closer relationship with than others. Probably, Joyce DiDonato has been a really important force in my life for many, many years. She's very inspiring to me, and I love sharing the stage with her. But when I moved to Zurich, I struggled a little bit because it was a culture that was very different from anything I'd ever lived in before. And in my first year, I couldn't quite find my balance, and I had to rebuild my career again. Everybody knew who I was in New York. I went to Switzerland, nobody knew who I was. I was this girl who came from New York. And so I reached out to Rolando Villason and said, hey, I'm living in Europe. If you need a pianist for something, I just want you to know that I'm here. I didn't hear back from him. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I guess that didn't work. And then about 4 months later, I get an email from his agent saying, Rolando needs someone to play a concert with him at the Salzburg Festival. Would you be interested? And I was like, yes. But there was a concert that had to happen in Leipzig right before that. And I had a conflict on that date because I was already working at the Salzburg Festival as a pianist that summer, my first summer working there. And so I had to go back to Salzburg and say, can you let me out of this contract so that I can go and play this concert and then come and back to Salzburg and play this recital with Villason? And they were not so happy, but I knew in my gut that it was the right thing to do. And it all worked out. And Rolando and I have since, I've had the immense good fortune to play in almost all of the great concert halls in Europe because of my relationship with Rolando.
Wow. Could you mention some of these, please, for those of us
Sure.
here in North America who wouldn't know these?
Sure. We've played at the Palais Garnier in Paris. We've played at the Bayerische Staatsoper in Munich. We've played at the Prinzregententheater also in Munich. We've played in Leipzig and in Copenhagen and Vienna. We got so many things got canceled because of COVID, so I'm trying to remember which one. Vienna is coming in November. I'm finally gonna get to make my debut in Vienna in November, like 3 years later. Mm-hmm. Graz. Haven't played the Concertgebouw. I'm looking forward to that Concertgebouw.
Okay. And could you just clarify, where is that?
In Amsterdam.
Thank you. Good.
Yeah.
Very good. All righty. This is wonderful. Let's move on, please, if we could. As you reflect, Carrie Ann, on the scope and breadth of your career to date, How did your UPEI undergraduate degree prepare you for all that's happened since?
Mm.
And perhaps you've already spoken to this because it's come up on a variety of occasions,
Yeah.
that, not only the music and academic instruction that you receive from faculty, but just that support
Mm-hmm.
that you felt while you were here.
Yeah.
Good.
I think probably I've gone around to various places, in a certain way replicating that kind of support and making sure that I am the person that you were for me when I was in college and I needed it.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about this the other day. There was one time in the middle of a January at UPEI that Dr. Reeser pulled me aside and said, Carrie Ann, February's coming. It's always a bad month for you. Watch out.
Oh my. Yeah.
Because in February, I would start like missing classes and getting really, not liking the dead of winter, which if you live in PEI that's going to be a real dead of winter.
There you
Says
go.
she who is in sunny California now. And February's okay.
Good. Good, good.
But I think probably being given the room to develop, and with the support of people who knew me,
Mm-hmm.
and who knew what I could be and what I was going to be, even when I didn't know it myself. I think that's what UPEI did.
Good. Very good. So, what projects are you currently working on? You mentioned you've got a forthcoming recital in Vienna.
Yeah, well, actually, in 2 days, I'm going to Switzerland for some rehearsals and a recital in Valencia at the Palau in Valencia, which will happen a week from yesterday. And that's with a wonderful, wonderful French Swiss tenor named Benjamin Bernheim, who is the new darling of Deutsche Grammophon. And yeah, that was a cool experience doing some recording for Deutsche Grammophon. That's one of those things that you go, how am I actually here having a conversation with the recording engineers from Deutsche Grammophon?
Wow.
But yeah, so Ben and I are doing this recital in Valencia, and I'm in the middle of developing what our summer program is going to look like for Merilla. And Rolando and I have a tour, a big new tour starting in June, that will be June and November. Wow. That we're going to tour Germany, Switzerland, and Austria.
Sounds fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. So, Carrie Ann, as we bring this interview to a close, could we go back where we started and focusing instead not on your studies, but on the studies of our current students? What message would you have for them given your studies and your career to date?
Ooh, how to narrow that down? I think probably is for them to stay open to all experiences. Everyone has something to teach you. Remain flexible. There's not only one way to do things. And if you really listen to your own gut, you're going to know what the right decision is for you. Surround yourself by people that you really trust, by teachers that you admire, and keep that inner circle. It's very important to have that kind of support. And also to just be willing to take big risks if you want to do something, if you want to quit your really important job and go have an adventure in Switzerland, do it. Do it. Just be brave and bold.
Terrific. Carrie Ann, thank you for that message, and thank you for sharing your unique professional journey with us. It's really absolutely remarkable all that you have accomplished and experienced since your undergraduate degree at UPEI. And so, on behalf of the UPEI music community, please accept our best wishes for your continuing professional success and personal happiness. Thank you, Carrie Ann.
Thank you, Karem.